1956, directed by Bud Boetticher, and stars Joseph Cotten, Rhonda Fleming, and Wendell Corey. The film opens with a bank robbery, after which Detective Sam Wagner, played by Joseph Cotten, is assigned to the case. The investigation quickly leads back to a teller at the bank, Leon Poole, played by Wendell Corey. As Wagner and the police attempt to arrest him, a gunfight breaks out, and the teller's wife is killed in the crossfire by Wagner himself. Vowing revenge, Poole breaks out of prison several years later, intending to take from Wagner the same thing that was taken from him, his wife. This film noir is directed by the master of these types of short, potboiler B-movies, Bud Boetticher. He is, of course, best known for his run of 7 amazing westerns with Randolph Scott, among them Comanche Station, Ride Lonesome, and my personal favorite, 7 Men from Now. In fact, this movie was released in February of 1956, and 7 Men from Now was released in August of the same year. Boetticher brings his skill for making tense, economical films to this one, and really shows why he is one of the most well-remembered filmmakers of this type from the 1950s in particular. While watching this movie, it made me think of another film I reviewed not long ago, The Steel Trap, also starring Joseph Cotten. Both films have an interesting parallel in that the crime at the center of each story is a bank robbery pulled off by one of the bank's employees. That's as far as the similarities go, though, but this film is interesting if you look at it as an alternative route the plot of The Steel Trap could have taken had Joseph Cotten's bank manager in that one not been quite as careful as he was in that film. It was fun seeing him on the opposite side of the law for this movie. I'm starting to realize this channel is becoming a promo for the career of Joseph Cotten. I just seem to keep reviewing his movies, but I have to say I wasn't quite as impressed with him here as I usually am, although I am inclined to blame the script more than anything for that. Certain reactions by his character to the events in the film just didn't ring true to me, whether that be his response to realizing he's accidentally killed the bank teller's wife, or learning that Poole has escaped and is coming for him. In the former, he seems oddly unfazed and not very apologetic, but that whole scene just felt a little bit off to me, partly because of Wendell Corey's reaction as well. But for his character, I think the muted response really plays into what that character becomes and what he does later on. As for learning about Poole and the fact that he's killing anyone that gets in his way, Joseph Cotten just seems to keep downplaying it long after he should have started taking the threat seriously. But he does an excellent job showing his concern and eventual real worry for his wife's safety. Speaking of which, I thought Rhonda Fleming was very good in her role. The problem for both of their characters is that they're each saddled with the type of cliche cop and his wife dialogue that we've all heard many, many times before. She argues that he only thinks about his work, and then he argues back that she can't ask him to give it up. Granted, it's a 73-minute film noir, so those cliches help move the plot along, but still, some of those scenes didn't add anything to the movie for me. What really worked is the fact that he is trying to keep the danger of the situation away from his wife. And the scenes of he and the other police officers trying to plan a way to keep her from getting even more worried, sometimes with her even in the next room, were very well done. That aspect of their marriage and their relationship was shown very well, that despite their arguments, they're both wanting to keep the other safe. The scenes apart from her is kind of where Joseph Cotten really shines the most in this movie, especially towards the end, as Poole is closing in and Wagner is getting more and more desperate. The real standout in this movie is Wendell Corey. His performance took a while to grow on me, but it really did by the end of the movie. What I mentioned earlier about his very downplayed response to his wife's death, while it initially seemed strange to me, kind of serves as the break in his conscience, or what makes him snap in an instant, leading him to what are pretty shocking crimes, starting from his escape and onwards. This is a middle-aged man working as a teller at a bank. So it's probably safe to assume that he's fairly mild-mannered, not a very aggressive person. So as we follow him as he evades the police, it's even more surprising when we see what he does. The murders he commits are mostly off-screen, but the weapons he chooses and what we learn afterwards is pretty brutal. The worst violence is mostly implied. This is a movie from the mid-50s, after all, but seeing him go about all of this so calmly is probably the most shocking part. We see very little of him before the initial bank robbery, so it's hard to compare what he was like before with what we're seeing play out. His performance is very underplayed. His voice barely ever gets above a calm, even tone, which makes him that much more chilling. I've never thought of Wendell Corey as a villain before, but this movie changed that, and his character is very memorable. It becomes very clear that this is a man teetering on the brink of insanity, but there are a couple of scenes where we suddenly realize that he's likely already over that edge. In the opening scene, before the bank robbery, a man he served with in the army shows up at the bank and talks with him. And from that, we learn he was often made fun of while in the service. He had a forgetful, clumsy reputation. So that inner suppressed anger also plays into his vicious rampage, really, that he embarks on. The movie is filled with familiar character actors as well. I really love it when a group of actors are together on screen and I can identify each of them from dozens of different roles, and this happens a couple of times in the film. Making appearances are Alan Hale Jr., Michael Pate, John Larch, Don Beto, amongst others that, like so many character actors, I know the face but not the name, but it's basically a who's who of people that were in every TV show through the 50s and 60s. The cinematography was by Lucien Ballard, who was already a veteran of many films, but he went on to do the cinematography for Ride the High Country, The Sons of Katie Elder, True Grit. I'm very used to his work in westerns, and he doesn't have quite the same expansive locations to lens this time, but his work here is, as always, very solid. The exterior scenes, of which there are quite a few, really look great. I love the look of black and white films from the 50s. They have such a crisp, defined look. The clothing and the cars and just the neighborhoods and buildings all together just give movies a great feel and atmosphere. Something that was different, though, is how often these characters appear soaking wet. I'm guessing they shot this movie in a relatively short amount of time, and they might have just ended up with a bunch of really rainy Los Angeles days. So whether characters have just come inside and they're dripping rain off their snap brim hats, or there are scenes of Poole walking the streets, the rain is just coming down. It was just something I thought was a little unusual compared to a lot of similar movies, and really helps cement that this story is happening within a really short period of time. This film kind of sneaks up on you in a way. As the story moves along and Poole is getting closer and closer, I suddenly started feeling the tension really building. It builds until one scene that I think is the best in the movie. Just to kind of set up this scene, Poole has taken a woman hostage in her house. He's desperately needing food after not having eaten since his escape, and then waits for her husband to come home. Once he does, the ensuing scene starts up and just keeps going and going. We've already been told that Poole has stolen a .357 Magnum, and he just calmly sits at the kitchen table, his gun in hand, while the man and his wife are becoming increasingly more worried and frightened of him. And all the while, Poole is still so unnervingly calm. And the suspense continues until finally he decides to kill the husband. He fires the revolver, which is incredibly loud, and the bullet explodes a milk bottle the husband was holding before taking him down. It was such a shock, and the shot of the husband lying there is so eerily grim, but not gory. Again, they couldn't get away with the violence they can today. So instead of blood, there is milk splattered all over the walls and just pooling on the floor. And it's kind of strangely disturbing, but also very effective. And Wendell Corey just coolly gets up, picks up his raincoat, and walks out. Just a very, very creepy scene. There's nothing after that scene that is quite as effective, but the ending is somewhat suspenseful. I found the whole climax quite reminiscent of The Desperate Hours from the year before with Humphrey Bogart and Frederick March. Whether that film was the inspiration for this ending, I'm not sure. The release dates are only a few months apart, but it was a fitting finale, I think. Like many of these shorter noirs, the ending is quite abrupt, but I think that works just perfectly here. All in all, I would recommend this film for Wendell Corey's performance alone, but also for Bud Boetticher or Joseph Cotten completists. If you like film noirs, I'm thinking you'll like this one. It's not perfect, but I really enjoyed it. And the Blu-ray that was put out by Classic Flicks a few years ago looks amazing, and I think it's the ultimate way to watch this movie. I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did, please check out my channel, Hildebrand Productions. Thanks for watching, and adios for now.